I just finished my first complete 1337 to 1836 game as Muscovy, which later transitioned into the Russian Tsardom, and I have to say this was probably the most fun I've had in Europa Universalis 5 to date by far. This was more fun than Byzantium, even simply because of the amount of flavor that Muscovy receives, because of its initial and later situation, and the gameplay style is just unique onto itself. We'll get into that in a few seconds, and we're going to use actual gameplay footage, courtesy of Paradox for allowing me to use footage from their Russia AAR on their official channel. Before we begin, Europa Universalis 5 is literally around the corner. If you haven't yet caught the game for yourself, consider using my link in the description below to grab it, or my code if you don't want to use the link. All you gotta do is add it to cart if you use the link, and then when you check out, you have creator referral activated, should say here. If it's not there, you just insert Ludiat Historia and it should activate it. Also, you can redeem it from this website on Steam once the game is out, and you can use my code for any game, doesn't have to be for EU5 only, and you can also use it later if you don't want to use it now, whenever you want to. I'd really appreciate it. I do content creation full-time, and I know it's very annoying when people ask you to use their code, but affiliate codes like this literally is how I put bread on the table for my family. And if you don't want to use my code, you can use any of the other content creators. I'm sure everybody would be very happy if you chose them. Doesn't cost you anything, but it really helps us a lot, since we just take a fraction of the amount you give Paradox and we keep it for ourselves, so then we can use that to conquer the world later down the line. Okay, that was the plan all along, to conquer the world with this affiliate code. Now, the starting situation for Muscovy is completely different from what you actually see on the Tinto talks, which is why I'm mostly going to be using the actual gameplay footage, because that's obviously the most accurate depiction. Simple example here is that Suzdal and Gorodets do not start anymore as junior members in a PU under Muscovy. We only have Kostroma, Uglish, Vladimir, Nizhny Novgorod, and Veliko Novgorod, or the Novgorod Republic. That being said, they do all start a part of the Tatar yoke. We see here in the video itself, the Tatar yoke is the Golden Horde, which basically is extracting tribute from the various Russian and Ruthenian principalities. Historically, one of the Russian principalities would collect the tribute from all the others, and then they would send it off to the Golden Horde. That would historically be Vladimir, and eventually Muscovy and Vladimir became basically ruled by the same individual, and as such Muscovy took the lead somehow. In our case here, Grand Prince Ivan Rurikovich starts off as the leader, or the Grand Prince, because the one that's collecting the tribute is known as the Grand Principality as consequence. Now, if you decide to in fact pay the Tatar yoke, you get 0.05 prestige and diplomats a month. If you decide not to pay the Tatar, you literally lose development and lose prestige up to 0.05 prestige. Let's just say that Muscovy is by far the vassal overlord, and using subjects as Muscovy is literally the meta right now, as well as how you handle the Golden Horde makes a massive difference in the campaign, right? So my first few games, I actually allowed the Golden Horde to exist up until the late 1300s. That was a mistake. That is definitely not meta. If you break away from the Tatar yoke and you, as consequence, trigger the collapse of the Golden Horde, you end up having a ton of little Tatar offsprings. Now, one thing you probably might have noticed is that the starting leader, Ivan Rurikovich, has seen a complete overhaul in his skills. So he's not 68, 44, 54 anymore. He's 66, 92, 70 at the start of the campaign in any case, and in the most recent patch in any case. I don't know what the next patches are going to bring. He might be completely different afterwards. The starting borders of Muscovy are exactly like this. This has not actually changed at all. All of the adjacent states are also exactly the same. Nothing has happened here that is noteworthy. They've got a few starting privileges for the boyars, or boyarstvo as they're called, apparently the nobility estates. They start with 5 privileges. Komlerengie, which I know I'm butchering the name, sorry for that by the way, is actually not the worst, since it only increases their power by 20%. And the other 4 privileges are not shown in this particular dev diary. The Riyadh you can give out, but you don't start with it. You can give it if you want to, however. They have between patches completely redone how personal unions work as well. So as we see from the official channel's video here, the Novgorod Muscovite Union starts with Novgorod as the leader of the union, which means that you cannot really do anything here. If you do decide to go for senior partnership, well, you're gonna be a junior member of Novgorod. So that's not gonna work, but rest assured that's okay, because after your initial leader dies, the Novgorodians will choose somebody else as their leader, because that's how they choose their leadership. They just choose one of the other Russian principality princes as their leader, and you end up being the senior leader over Kostroma, over Nizhny Novgorod, over Uglish, and over Vladimir. So these are your actual starting union members. Now, all of them are, of course, Muscovite Orthodox, and that's really important too, because it's going to be a lot easier to integrate them later if you do decide to go ahead with the personal unions. However, that's not really the best option, because since you are the same culture, what is the actual meta is vassalizing everybody. So all of these little nations you see here, I'm talking Suzdal, Rostov, Vladimir, Kostroma, Nizhny Novgorod, Kalish, etc., I made into vassals diplomatically. So you can, from the start of the campaign, easily diplomatically vassalize most of the other Russian principalities, the Muscovite ones anyway. I did have to have a war against Ryazan, which starts with Pronsk as its subject. So I vassalized Ryazan through war. All the other Russian principalities I diplomatically vassalized. Take note though, a lot of the times what happened was these nations that I vassalized had their own vassals. So Vladimir vassalized Murom, Nizhny Novgorod started with Gorodets as its vassal, Koroma vassalized Galish-Mersky. So I had like 4 vassals, which in turn had their own vassals, and after they integrated their vassals, I integrated them. So why do we do this? Well, first off, it's easier because they're also Muscovites and Orthodox, but second off, that way I don't waste my time with my cabinet member having to integrate all of those different states. They do it for me, so when I annex these nations, I automatically have those particular provinces integrated. So yes, early on and even in the mid-campaign, in some cases for the entire campaign, vassalizing is literally the most efficient way of expanding, since you can start integrating your subjects after 10 years, and it's honestly not that difficult to integrate. Some changes that I do see is you start with a little bit more money. You actually start with 92.09 ducats. You start as the 58th power in the world. So you see here, this is the rank of the nation, 50th. So if you're in the top great power, say if you're the 7th great power in the world, for example, it would say there 7, and you'd have a specific icon if you're a great power as well. So once you become a great power, this little thing changes a little bit more. In this build, Russia was stronger than it is in my current build. Now, when you hover over nations like this, you see everything from that particular nation. You see the rank, so this is a duchy. You see the amount of locations they have, 2 in this case of Dumitrov, the amount of population, the base tax, the amount of soldiers they could potentially field. So this is 416 levies, the same for the navies, and their religion and culture, as well as the relations they have with you and the relations you have with them. From a trade perspective, something that haunted me through all of my playthroughs, including the main one, which was 1337 to 1836. That's the first that I did all the way till the end of the campaign, because the Byzantine one I finished around 18 something. I didn't go all the way to 1836. But yeah, this was fun. This was actually a lot of fun. So there were some issues. One of them was the trade, right? So I'm not sure what they show in this particular AAR, what their issues were, but for me, gold was one of the biggest ones. Lead. There's only one lead province that you have access to at the start of the campaign, which is in Poland, which you don't have access to actually because you need to increase your trade range. So in order to trade lead, you have to be lucky to get lead from an adjacent market, either from the Kiev or the Novgorod market, and then if they have it there, you trade it over to your province. Same with gold. If they have it, you trade it over to your province, and they don't have much of it at the start. You have actual access to lead in the Siberian parts and the Urals. There's a single lead province in the Urals, but you have to push for the Urals to get your first lead province. It's not the only one. There's a few other ones that are issues. So from a trade perspective, Muscovy is good because it has a lot of food producing stuff. There's tons of livestock provinces. Almost half the steppe provinces are livestock, so you're never gonna starve. You have a lot of wheat, you have a lot of fiber, you got a lot of fiber crops, that is. You got a lot of food stuff, a lot of lumber, but not actually that much minerals. Same with iron. You got to go to the Urals. It's vital that you go to the Urals. If somebody else takes Urals before you, that was also literally why I had 3 of my runs die, because I was unable to grab the Urals because the Timurids grabbed the Urals, and you do not mess with the Timurids, that's for sure, at least not when Timur is alive. And I got in essence cucked from getting the Urals, which was very unfortunate, because then I got no way of accessing mid to late game resources required for my armies and my industry. Now personally, I recommend not giving out any privileges for the nobility, because they are an absolute pain to deal with, and you have to revoke a few of their privileges to weaken them. You want to get as much crown power as possible. If you give privileges to the nobility, you're going to suffer a lot up until the mid campaign, when you're actually able to start revoking without issues their privileges. Now this picture here is a perfect way of me using paint to show you what my expansion path was and why it was like that. So in my run, I actually attacked Ryazan first. When I had my first Parliament CB, I went for Ryazan. Let me make this a little bit thicker here. So I did that because Ryazan already starts with the southern subject, so I basically get 2 for the price of 1, and this is a big chunk on the border with the Golden Horde. I vassalized them. The reason I vassalized them was actually really important. See, I don't care about them as a vassal as much as I care about them for the purpose of improving relations with the Ryazani culture. So I was actually able to improve with 3 Ryazani nations, so I made my own subject later down the line after I took land from the Golden Horde in Tambov. I made the Principality of Tambov as a subject, as a vassal type of subject, and then I improved with these 2 as well as with Tambov, which meant I had plus 15% satisfaction for Ryazani cultures, and because of the increase threefold in relations, I was able to make Ryazani an accepted culture for just 0.15 cultural capacity. That's crazy. So I went from like 0.6 to 0.15, roughly, not exact 0.6. I don't remember how much it was initially, but 0.15 after 3 nations. The way it works is the more nations of that particular culture you improve your culture relations with, the cheaper it gets. This will be fixed. I actually made a ticket and Johan took note of it. Another example is a completely separate culture, right? So this is, you remember that it's cheaper for cultures within your culture group to make them accepted cultures. But for example, Kazani, which was completely outside of my culture group, same. It would cost like 2 normally cultural capacity, and I brought it down to like 0.2. That's 10 times cheaper. In essence, I could accept with 4.0 cultural capacity, which is what I had by 1450. I could accept with that the entirety of Siberia and the entirety of Eastern Europe. That is broken as schnitzel. Okay, so I had to make the ticket. So by the time you guys are going to play the game, it is not going to be that little. You're welcome, because otherwise it would be a very easy game. I know you don't want an easy game. Now, do you? Everyone right now be like, Ludi, you scumbag! I wanted to take advantage of that. Trust me, it's for the betterment of everyone, okay? You don't want this game to be too easy. I'm sure you don't want to. Now, after I got Ryazan, I actually was able to get diplomatically subject. So I got Suzdal as my first diplo subject. It was very easy. Then I got Vladimir as my second diplo subject. Remember, you do start with Vladimir as your personal union. Why am I pointing this out exactly? It's because even though they are your personal union junior partner, you can still vassalize them in EU5. That's how it works. So let me actually hash this out with a different color. So this means personal union member, but still can diplo vassalize them, which is huge in my opinion. Also, if you don't want to diplomatically vassalize them, what you could do is you could wait for 50 years, and after 50 years you can turn them into a dominion. So a dominion is kind of like the middle ground between vassalage and personal union. It's not really worth it in my opinion, because in 50 years you should already start the process of integrating them as a regular union member instead of just at that point making him a dominion. But you have the option. Let's just say it's nice that you have the option to make them a dominion if that's what you want. Fastest way to get rid of these nations though is to just vassalize them. So I think it was 1370 when my borders looked a little bit like this. So Tver I actually directly annexed. I annexed all of Tver, I annexed Dimitrov, and I did that because Tver starts with 3 subjects of their own, this, and this, namely Zubtsov, Kashin, and Klin. Basically, it's a cluster schnitzel. I didn't want to deal with that. I just directly annexed all 4 better yet, which is 3 states actually, or 3 provinces. After I annexed those 4 and Dimitrov, I didn't directly annex anything for quite a few years. I've just expanded through a diplo vassalage, with one exception that we'll get to in a few seconds. Now, Yaroslav I also turned into a diplo vassal, and I believe that they actually completely annexed Uglitch themselves. So I don't know, Uglitch suddenly became a part of Yaroslav, so I assume that's what happened. Kostroma I also diplo-vassalized, and Kostroma also got the Galishmersky, or I think, no, Nizhny Novgorod got Galishmersky, and Kostroma vassalized Nizhny Novgorod, so they were like this big when I vassalized them, which meant that it took a little bit longer to integrate Kostroma compared to everybody else. Vladimir also had Murom as a subject when I diplo-vassalized them, so by 1370, let's say 1380, I don't remember exactly, I was this big. So I had all of these lands, all of this here. I think I integrated almost all the Muscovite ones, so all of these guys were already directly owned by me. Let's say this was Muscovy proper. Ryazan was still a subject, and I had one war against the Great Horde, and I took this much from them. I basically took all of this area here. I had the states of Tula. This is Tula here. I had Yelets right over here. Lipetsk was somewhere around here, and then Tambov was a little bit bigger. This one would be Tambov, from which I released the Principality of Tambov, or Vassal of Tambov. Then we also had Mokchka. Kasimov was here as well, and I believe also Sarov over here, which was the biggest pain out of them all. We'll talk about why in a few moments. So yeah, this looks horrible. Let me make it very clear what I had by roughly around the 1380s. It was in essence these borders here. It doesn't seem like a lot, but in terms of EU5, this is a lot by 1380, because you start with basically 5 provinces from day one, and expanding to what is around 35 provinces is a buttload of expansion. And because I made all of these subjects and integrated them, all of this was incorporated. Now there were some issues, even though they were incorporated, there were issues with the northern ones. Galishmersky, for example, because it was not an accepted culture, and also here not an accepted culture. Sarov was a pain because it wasn't an accepted culture. Kasimov was a pain as well. So these areas took me up until the 1420s to actually make cores. So despite owning these lands and having them integrated, all of the red line took around 50 plus more years to make full cores out of, because you have to make them your culture or an accepted culture, as well as your religion. And they are not either, because they're not your religion. Also, they start with the folk religions, most of these areas, or Tengri or Sunni a little bit in the south. Now the southern bits I gave to Tambov. Remember this guy, the Principality Tambov? They got big. They got like this big. All of the southern parts was Tambov in essence. And I did that because all of this land is Ryazani, right? So the Ryazani borders are around this big here. All of this is Ryazani culture, roughly. Roughly this is Ryazani culture. So I had 2 subjects, Ryazan in the north and Tambov in the south. And because Ryazan integrated their subject at one point, I integrated Ryazan first, and then Tambov was integrated by 1578. Yeah. It took a while, because the bigger your subject is, the harder it is to integrate. And also, they're not a Muscovite culture, so it's even harder, right? If they were Muscovite culture, it would make a difference. Now, you might be asking, Ludi, why didn't you just convert them to your culture? Here's the deal with that. You can convert them to your culture in EU5, but what happens is they convert back to whatever is the majority culture of their nation. This is actually with the more recent patch, so I'm not sure how it's going to be by release. Before, they would never convert their culture, so you ended up having stuff like all of the Golden Horde being Mongolian by 1500s, because the Golden Horde is Mongolian at the start of the campaign, right? That's their primary culture. If they didn't convert to another culture in the meanwhile, you have the entirety of the steppes Mongolian. There's like 8 million Mongolians by the 1500s in there. But they needed to address that, because you also had stuff like the Middle East was Mongolian, because a lot of the hordes, the Jaya-Arids and such, they also were primary culture Mongolian. So you ended up 1600s, I remember, that was half the freaking world Mongolian. That was not it. That was definitely not it. I'm exaggerating. It wasn't half the world, but it was the Mongol world, Mongolian. Now they just convert to whatever is the primary culture. So what I did in my case, I gave Tambov a lot of Kazani lands. I gave him way too many Kazani lands. So Kazani became their primary culture. They switched from Ryazani to Kazani, which made it more difficult for me to integrate them. And I gave him a lot of provinces, so I was kind of greedy. So that's why it took a long time to integrate. I remember I had basically this much territory by the point when I integrated Tambov. I'm not even exaggerating. I was this massive when I incorporated. It took a long time before I incorporated them. I was close to forming Russia when I was... Actually, no. I did integrate them as Russia. I became the Russian Tsardom before I integrated them. Yes, because I remember I snaked across through a little narrow corridor I had, and I got all of the Siberian parts before I integrated Tambov. It was a pain. So yeah, the idea is it's good to have subjects if they are your your culture. If they're not, it is significantly more difficult to integrate. And you also don't want them to be big, because you also get a bonus if they're small compared to your size. They get integrated a lot faster. So the idea is that you want to have many little one province subjects instead of one 6 province big boy. That is a mistake. I will not repeat again, that's for sure. Maximum 2 provinces per subject from now on. Obviously, what matters most is the amount of locations, towns, and cities that they have when you integrate them. The more towns and cities they have, the harder it is to integrate them as consequence. Also, I want to address something here. A lot of people were asking, how can you invite settlers? Is it possible to invite settlers? Somebody was saying that you can only invite settlers as the Vikings or something. No, that's not true. Settlers, you can invite pretty much as all settled countries you have to be to invite settlers. You gotta have favors with that particular nation, and then you can start inviting settlers. It's actually a really easy way of growing population. I like doing it a lot, especially with my subjects too. I was inviting settlers from everywhere into Muscovy to grow Muscovy as soon as possible. So you want to abuse this because growth is very tough early on in the campaign, and having as many settlers invited from as many parts of the world is really, really beneficial. Also, for the first, second, and third age, all 3 of the first ages, I went for admin ideas. Why did I do that? Because in my opinion, both Diplo and military focuses are very, very underwhelming. Sure, if you want to have a bigger army, you can go for that. You will have slightly stronger units, but not so much of it. It doesn't really make that much of a difference in general. Plus, the proximity cost you get from the local infrastructure here that Habibi also illustrates is massive. The Russians in particular have, I believe, the highest stacking amount of proximity reductions, because the Russian Tsardom also gives proximity reduction bonuses. There's a few reforms that do that. So overall, by the 1520s, 1530s, I think he also shows it here, you end up having a lot of control. Now, I actually plan on dedicating a big chunk of this video to control and how it revolves within the Russian Tsardom and Muscovy implicitly, because honestly, this is what really made, for me at least, Muscovy an insanely fun nation. Because first off, Muscovy can get, of course, when I say Muscovy, I mean the Russian Tsardom as well. They can get the highest amount of proximity reduction modifier stacking out of any nation in the game that I've played so far, and I've played most of the majors, most of the medium-sized nations, a couple of the minor nations. After I learned how to properly play as Muscovy and the Russians, I went from that to basically getting ridiculous amounts of control. And I'm talking, in my 3rd game alone, I was around 1540, so that's 50 years earlier than this particular campaign that we're seeing here. I had 100 control in my core areas, so the light blue would be 100 control. Usually what I do personally is I keep Muscovy as my capital. Obviously, I don't change from Muscovy because it's very central, and the more central a location is, the better the proximity reduction over land spreads around the rest of your country. So that's very important, the location of the capital. Second off, all of the adjacent provinces to Muscovy I turned into towns and then into cities whenever they had 50,000 population, because now, as of the current patch, you need 50,000 population minimum to turn a location into a city. Otherwise, you can just take it as a town. And with towns, you have increased control buildings like the temple, like the... Okay, little bit of a pause here. I got this little fluffy ball, keeps going around my legs everywhere. She's like, "Hey, what you doing? You recording video again? I want to also check what's happening here. Let me see what's going on." Cat, she likes to sit on top of my PC because it's nice and warm. Especially when I'm playing EU5, it's nice and warm, you know what I mean? Back to the theme at hand. There are buildings that increase your control in towns and in cities, so you obviously want to upgrade all of your locations to towns and cities if you can. Only downside to that is, of course, that you lower the amount of RGOs that you can have in those locations. So you don't want to have all of them towns and cities. You want to at least keep half of your location so you don't starve your country out. That can happen, especially if you're playing in Italy and Germany. You can end up with every location being a town or a city, and you have to import most of your food from other parts of the world. Anyway, so the core area was 100, and I mean 100 control by the 1540s, which is wild. I have not seen any other nation out of the nations that I've personally played be able to do this, right? The next area was around 90 to 95 control, okay? So that was, this whole area was 90 to 95. I'm talking close to 100 locations between 100 to 90. That is crazy amount of control. So this we can make with a little bit of a different color, say this one, and then the third area, which was pretty large, which would be like this large. This would be around 80, between say 80 to 90 control in this entire area. That's because this control you're getting is 100% because of the reduced proximity to capital modifiers. And yes, in case you haven't figured that out by now, the modifier stacking is back, and it's back in force. In fact, there is so much modifier stacking in the current build of EU5, literally more modifier stacking than EU4. So take that with a grain of salt, you know? This is what your core area looks like, right? So we got 100 in the middle, boom. We got 95 around the fringes. Let's probably do this with a different color. So 80 to 90 around this particular area. The rest, it varies. Of course, there's a lot of things that play into this. So as you would imagine, you can also see on Habibi's map here, there are a lot of different numbers for control. Ideally, this would be the amount you would get if a few things are checked. First off, you need to make sure you have roads. So paved roads, personally, I obviously had by this point every location in Eastern Europe, which is all owned by me. It had a gravel road, which is the first tier of road, right? Let's actually make a list here somewhere. We can say, make it here. So we got gravel / paved roads everywhere. So gravel and paved roads you want to have in every single location imaginable. Gravel road lowers proximity cost by 20. Paved road lowers it by 25. But you also get movement cost minus 30% on paved roads, and market access cost minus 15% on paved roads. So roads in general, you need to rush for. I learned this after a few games. It is vital to rush for roads. Having road technology will make the difference between you getting filthy rich. There's certain buildings, not just roads, but it's definitely one of the top things you want to research first off when you unlock a new technology group or a new age, better yet. Roads are just absolutely important, okay? Aside from that, all of these have to be incorporated. So if you haven't integrated, better yet, if you haven't integrated a province, you get this. So you see here in this particular province, because it's not a core, you automatically lose on the plus 20% control from it being a core. In fact, if it's got the conquered level, you get minus 10% control for being a conquered province, right? Because there's different levels. You got conquered, you've got integrated, and then you got cored province, right? So that's 30% control you're losing out. So even if you have the road, which lowers the proximity debuff to capital, you still are going to have very low control overall. You need to make sure first step you integrate everything. Now as you progress in the campaign, by 1550 1540 I did have how many? I had 5 cabinet members. So 3 of them you get from each of the age. You get from Renaissance, you get from Reformation, you get from a Discovery age. You get 1 cabinet member from each of those because they have specific advantages for it. Oh, but yet advances for it. She's back. She's like, what is this advance you're talking about, Papa? Let me just smell your feet and lick them whilst you're trying to record. And also let me go climb your computer again. Yeah, look, it's nerds. Nerds watching nerd videos. Yeah, they're like Papa. They're Papa Pete. Right, I was getting the 3 from the advances, the 2 starting ones, and you also get 1 more from being an Empire rank, because when you form the Russian Tsardom, you get +1 cabinet members. The Empire rank gives an extra cabinet level. So actually it's 6 now that I think about it. It's not 5. I'm really bad with mathematics, apparently. You probably guessed that if you watched the channel for a while. Also, another thing that helped massively in Russia is bridges. So wherever you have a river, if you have a road built first, you can afterwards build a bridge. A bridge increases control in that location by a flat 5%, which is huge. And do you know how many bridges there are? Everywhere. So because there's rivers everywhere. You got 1 here, 1 here, 1 here. There's so many. Literally half of Russia you could build bridges in. So basically you can have an extra 5% control in half of Russia, which makes a massive difference. You also get an extra max 5 control from building temples in your towns and cities, and an extra minus 5% proximity cost from building pound lock canals. Now these can only be built in towns and cities, not in villages. Keep that in mind. But 5% proximity reduction is huge in your cities and towns. So you can have random cities around this area, like quite far from your capital, that might have 95 to 100 control. Some of the main proximity cost modifiers would be centralization, which offers minus 10% proximity cost at max centralization, which you should have by 1400 at the latest. list because centralization is one of the most vital values you have to push for. You got local infrastructure, which is an age 3 technology that we saw from picking the right age, so you get that an extra minus 2.5 proximity cost reduction. Pious prosperity gives another 5% proximity cost reduction. That is a unique mechanic for the Orthodox Church. You basically call the Orthodox Synod, and you have a few things you can choose for. I always go for the pious prosperity because it is just overpowered as schnitzel if you stack it up with everything else. Tsardom gives minus 2.5 proximity cost reduction. The Nametsnik office gives another minus 2.5%, and then you have another minus 10% proximity cost through land by going full land value. That's right, as the Russians, you want to go 100% land value. You don't want to have even a tiny bit of naval value because that 10% proximity through land is huge, and I mean huge. The Sudebnik also gives minus 10% proximity cost through land, and itinerant court gives another minus 10% proximity cost through land. So that's overall around 52.5% proximity cost reduction for the whole country. But then you have unique buildings that lower that and other things you can do to lower it. The road also, remember, you get the extra 25% proximity impact from the paved road alone. So we're up to like 80% proximity costs from just these standard things, not even including the rest of the buildings you can do. So yeah, you can have 100, and I think what I got it maximum to was like 105 or 115% proximity cost reduction. Now I am 100% sure they will nerf this because you're not supposed to get that much, and there's a cap, so everything above minus 90% proximity cost reduction doesn't count anymore. But simply the fact that you can have up to minus 115 proximity cost reduction as Russians is crazy. Even though there's a cap at 90, right? At least make it so you can maximum get up to minus 90, which makes sense because that's where the cap is anyway, right? Now I have to say, and I don't know if anyone from Paradox watches this video, probably not. I hope they don't nerf it, simply because, like I said, I played a lot of games so far. I'm hovering around the 500 hours mark already. I've been playing way too much EU5, I know, but I love it. It's a great game, and you should get it with my code. I appreciate it if you do. Again, sorry for the self promo. The thing is, this was fun. This was the most fun I had out of all the freaking campaigns. I really hope they don't nerf this, man, because this was so much fun. I really cannot express how amazing it was. Instead of struggling with the most minute of things to not die off, to just ruffle stomp and just have all the economy in the world and have such a great time. And take note, like I said, there were a few games that I failed prior because I didn't know what the meta was. I didn't know how to stack it to this amount of control. My first few games were like in the video that we saw. It was like 50 control around the 1550s. That's because I wasn't building my roads. I wasn't going for the right values. I wasn't going for the right buildings, right? I learned that after a few games, and I'm sure there's more stuff I can learn in my MUSCOVY playthrough. I'm sure other people are playing it 10 times better than me. I'm not even surprised that they are because they've had more hours in the game. They know a lot better how to play it, which is normal. Even for me, I'm sure when I play this again, I'm gonna do a complete 1337 to 1836 new full campaign. You guys actually should let me know in the comment section. Do you want me to do one video, the whole campaign, and leave as much as possible in, or just make it highly edited? I mean, I plan on making it highly edited anyway, but it's probably going to be about 20 hours of footage. So I'm thinking either 40 minutes of super highly edited or 2 hours of highly edited, but still a lot of info, because that's 500 years of gameplay, and I need to say a lot of things to put you guys on the right path, at least from what I've experienced. I know there's going to be changed a lot afterwards based on what I learned later down the line, right? Rant over about control. There's a lot more to say, but for now, rant is over. If you guys have any questions about control, let me know in the comment section. Also want to mention that there's a few disasters unique to the Russians, like we have here the Times of Trouble disaster, which is horrible. It really messes with your gameplay a lot. There's a lot more than this though. I remember I had the Great Fires of Moscow or something like that. It completely destroyed almost all of my buildings in Moscow. I had like 20 something marketplaces. I ended up with like 0 marketplaces after. It killed half of my economy. That was horrible. So yeah, you got stuff like that can happen as well, which is good because, you know, you don't want to have just straight up insane amount of overpoweredness. And don't get me wrong, early on, I sugarcoated a lot of stuff there because early on, MUSCOVY is pain. If you don't know how to deal with the Golden Horde, you will get Schnitzeldorf. First off, there's 2 basically approaches to the Golden Horde. You can let him survive. If you do let him survive, what can happen is you might end up having this issue here. here, the Timurids. So whenever the Timurids spawn, which should be in 1360, January 1360, well, the problem then is that they can have a single war against the Golden Horde and completely eat the entirety of the Golden Horde. So you have the option of collapsing the Golden Horde before that, which means you're going to have to deal with a lot of successor states. You might get some coalitions because there's more nations to get aggressive expansion against you. Or if you destroy it and you break the yoke very early on and it collapses very early on, you're not going to have all Sunni Muslims because half of the Golden Horde is Tengri. So you're going to have some Sunnis, you're going to have some Tengri, you might have some Orthodox, you might have some nations that break away that are folk religions. So a lot less aggressive expansion or antagonism when you start expanding, which in turn means that you're going to have an easier time slowly killing off each one by one. And when the Timurids start expanding, one war to kill the entire Golden Horde. However, they can have only one invasion per year, and all the successor states are not going to be allied to one another. So they say they kill off Nogai or they kill off Astrakhan, and that's it. They stop there. Eventually, Timurid dies, and they're not going to expand anymore, and you're going to be safe. So that's one of the trade-offs. Another one is that the Golden Horde has the potential to get super strong around the 1360s if the Timurids do not attack the Golden Horde and they attack eastwards towards Chagatai or towards the Indian parts. Then the Golden Horde will likely get very strong. So it's going to take you maybe a little bit longer to get rid of the Golden Horde and get rid of the yoke, simply because they're going to have an easier time keeping control over the Russian Principality. From a population perspective, I have to say most of my towns were around 20,000 and I didn't have many. I think so this game here, he is in 1485. I don't know how many towns he has, but for me in 1485, I had maybe 10 towns. That's it. It was really pathetic. I mean, really pathetic. Also, with the Russians, the snowballing starts from the 1520s. So around the 1520s, you should be able to form Russia around that time. In order to form Russia, you need to have 509 locations within the historical Russian border. So that's basically all of the starting Russian lands, the Ukrainian parts, the steppe horde lands, and so on. 509 locations is not little. It is a lot of them. And you also need to have Muscovy and Novgorod. These two cities must be under your control to be able to form the Russian nation. And when it comes to population growth, it is so slow, the population growth in the first 150 years. It is wild how slow it is. Also, we'll struggle with the institutions. So that's another thing. Since we have this screen right here, the only way for you to get institutions in the first 100 years, so I'm talking about the only way to get the Renaissance institutions, is trade with nations that have those institutions. You will not be able to trade with them though, because initially Muscovy only is able to trade with Novgorod and with Kiev. That's it. The only two markets you can trade with until you start expanding. So you got to wait for the Renaissance institutions to arrive in Novgorod and then start trading with Novgorod or Kiev and bringing it to your land. So it takes a really long time. The alternative to this, so I didn't do this in the first few games. Again, you learn the more you play the game, from what I've realized, which you guys will realize too. The way that I bypassed this situation was, the problem was that because I in the first few games, I didn't get the institutions spawned in time in my country. I was just wasting innovation. So I didn't have any technologies or advances that I could research because I didn't have the institutions embraced for like 20 years. It was really bad. 20 years of not researching anything is just super bad. So the next playthrough, what I did was I made a subject in an area which already had the institutions, and then I used subject interactions to bring the institutions to my country, basically. So that's not an exploit. That's pretty much the only way in which you can actually bring the institutions of the Russians, since you don't have the trade range early on to just straight up trade with Stockholm or straight up trade with the Germans. You don't have the trade range. You just don't have it. It's very limited because you are a very massive nation. Shortage wise, early in the campaign, glass is your big shortage. As you progress, you will have shortages of lead, gold, silver, tin. That's the other one. The other problem is tin. There's just no tin anywhere for some freaking reason. On the other hand, there is a lot of lumber, a lot of food of all sorts, except the good sorts. There's no rice at all. You have mostly just livestock and wheat and grain. There's a lot of unique government reforms, like the Prikazi government reform that we have here from this particular event. The Prikazi gives centralization plus 0.05, admin efficiency plus 10%, and efficiency of our cabinet plus 15%. That's right, 15%. Actually, one thing that also surprised me a lot by playing as Muscovy is that they have the highest amount of efficiency of cabinet I've seen out of any freaking nation. So yeah, we see here the bonuses, and you have to, of course, enact this particular institution after you got the event for it. So you're gonna have to change whatever other reform you've got from before. One both good and bad part about playing in Eastern Europe is also that there's not many forts, so it's easy to conquer other provinces because there's not many forts, but at the same time it's easy to get conquered because there's not a lot of many forts, basically. Now we see here also the two types of subjects, vassals and fiefdoms. The main difference, I like to do vassals personally. The main difference is that fiefdom, the leader of your fiefdom is the same leader of your country. Vassal is a completely different person that leads that particular nation. And the vassals, they spread 20% of embraced institutions to your capital. So if your vassal has an institution embraced, it will spread it to your capital by default, as well as pay you 20% of their income. So that's why, like I said, I was making a lot of subjects in areas that have the institution, using them to get the institution to my country, which is something you cannot do with fiefdoms, which only give you 20% of their income. They don't give the institution spread as well. Not sure why, but it is a small little difference that makes a massive change in how well your game runs, in my opinion. The Russians also have a lot of unique laws, like the Vestiarium we see over here. So this law by default will give you 0.5 monthly control increase, which is a huge amount. 0.5 monthly control is really a lot of extra control monthly. Expected cost of court minus 2.5 can literally save you hundreds of ducats in the 1500s per month. Hundreds of ducats per month from this one freaking reform. It's insane. From this one law, sorry. And urban building cost minus 10% stacks with all the other building cost modifiers, so you can end up building super fast. In essence, I have to say, from a multiplayer perspective, Muscovy is going to be a favorite for a lot of people, and I mean a lot of people. Now, as I said earlier in the Age of Discovery, I also went for admin. Pretty much first 3 ages admin is meta. Like you see here, speed integration plus 10% is insane, especially since you're still going to have quite a few subjects by 1430s when this triggers, and you want to integrate those subjects a lot faster. There's a lot of other speed of integration modifiers you can go for. There's laws, for example, you can get an extra 10% from having by blood feudal de jure laws, which also increases your outwards value by 0.10. We see here he had Renaissance spread in Moscow by 0.64%. That is definitely from trade alone. If you hover over it, it actually would tell you what exactly influences that though. Once a particular institution has been embraced in your capital, for example, it will start spreading to adjacent provinces. So we see here banking and professional army is spreading significantly faster than Renaissance in the adjacent provinces to Moscow, because these two institutions have been embraced within Moscow itself, and in general having an adjacent province have a specific institution will increase it faster if you have good relations. So say for example a neighbor of yours has an institution, but you got horrible relations with that nation, right, and you border it, it's gonna slowly spread to your provinces. If you improve relations, you got good relations with your neighbor who has the institutions, it's gonna spread significantly faster by contrast to your land. In order to embrace an institution, you need to have it spread to at least 20% of your locations, so it can be more or less ducats and stability based on how many provinces have that particular institution spread to. Also, another little thing here, you basically start with Church Slavonic as your liturgical language, which also determines how fast you get innovation. Around the 1500, I like to change from liturgical Slavonic to Russian, which is a stronger language. By 1500, for me, Russian had 15% language power. So that is a lot of language power compared to Church Slavonic, right? Basically, changing to Russian means you get more innovation because your liturgical language gives you a bonus to your innovation. So you can get technologies faster by doing that particular little interaction. And it only costs 20 stability. There you go. He also changed to Russian, which makes a lot of difference. I think he just said the same thing in his video, didn't he? Probably. Another thing that increases the innovation gain is the amount of institutions that you've embraced. So you want to embrace your institutions as soon as possible, because the more institutions embraced, the more monthly research progress. Here we see see the synod, you call it when you have 75 religious influence. Every single one of these have more options. So if you go for local administration and then you go for the first option afterwards, you get the proximity cost reduction that I was talking about earlier. Or you can also do this, you can go for research progress if you really want to get more research. Here's another big deal with the Age of Reformation technologies. And yes, in case you're wondering, all of these technologies stay forever. So it doesn't matter what point in the campaign you are, these advances, once you've researched them, you keep them for the rest of the campaign. They don't go away. So having those proximity bonuses from the early admin option stacked up with the bonuses you get from these is just huge. Like, for example, building paved road cost minus 10% is massive because usually paved roads cost a lot. I remember I made a road from Moscow to the Urals. It cost me 6,000 ducats for one straight line. 6,000 for a paved road line. That was crazy amounts. Hey, this is the event I was talking about earlier, the Great Fire of Moscow. It basically destroys Moscow. It is crazy how bad this event is. There you go. We see here the Tsardom with the proximity cost minus 2.5%. You also get certain events that can trigger, like the Baltic Frontier, which can give you a casus belli on every province in the Baltic region in exchange for 5 antagonism. Goes without saying, big yes, go for those casus bellis. It is huge. Now, one more thing to point out, in the first few games, I had a lot less manpower than he's got in his game here by 1550. I had probably 20,000 because I didn't have as many towns and cities because I didn't realize how important they were. After, in the last game, the one that I went all the way to 1836, I probably had 100,000 soldiers by 1550 and I was gaining like 600 ducats a month in 1550, 1560s. Why? Because of towns. Towns make such a massive difference, dude. It is wild. There's a lot of economic buildings that you can have in towns that just completely double down on your entire country. Not only that, but the more towns, the more armories you can build. Later, you can also build training fields, which can be built in villages. So training fields give about the same amount of manpower as your armories do. And training fields means that you're going to go from 100,000 manpower, which you have from the armories in towns and cities, to 1,000,000 manpower within a couple of years. That's the difference. Simply because you're going to spam this in all of your villages, basically, if you have the economy for it, which you should have, of course. Because if you don't, you're going to have issues because other nations like the Indians, which are going to unify into one massive blob, will have a lot of soldiers. Remember in 1595, I checked, Vijayanagar basically unified most of India and they had 4 million soldiers, bro. And I was like, I need to build more training fields. This is not okay. Now, as you can see here, if you don't have specific goods when you recruit your units, you will have that particular recruitment process paused. So you need to make sure you have enough goods in your market for whenever you need to recruit your soldiers. And another thing I noticed is that the AI doesn't do such a great job at making sure the formations have the units on the right, the flanks, or in the center. So a lot of the times what happens is you end up fighting and winning very easily certain battles because the AI just doesn't properly set its units on the flanks, for example, or it puts, like, for example, 10,000 soldiers in the center, 10,000 on the left flank, and 5 on the right flank. I don't know why. I really don't know why. It does make it, especially in the later part of the campaigns, for some very, very easy battles against the AI, in my opinion, but still numbers win. So if you go up against the Indians, which have outnumber you 4-1, you will lose. Look at that. See exactly what I was talking about here. So you see the Timurids don't have an even distribution of their units, so they don't have the entirety of the frontage occupied here. When one of these collapses, it is very bad for you. Same on the Russian side, actually. The right flank is a little bit weaker here, and that's probably because, you know, as a player, you don't individually check every army. You expect the AI to assign in your armies units on every particular side, right? But it doesn't. That's why when I raise levies, I have to individually check every single army to make sure I have enough frontage for the sides and for the center, because it can happen all of them in the center and there's 0 on the flanks, for example. That can happen. I've had that. I've raised units with 0 units on the flanks. I don't know why. Later institutions, like from the Age of Reformation onwards, is very easy to get institutions because there is actually a cabinet action that allows you to spread institutions with your cabinet members. Not only that, but you're going to have borders with nations that where these particular institutions spawn, or you could potentially spawn these institutions in your country depending on your game settings. So So the first couple of ages is a bit of an issue. Fourth age and onwards is not an issue with the embracing institutions as the Russians at all. We see here what his Russian tsardom looked like by 1590. That's actually bigger than mine. By 1590, mine was a lot less than that. I had all of the Siberian parts because that's by default. You just colonize this. You don't do nothing. You just click a button and then you select from where your colonists leave. So in my case, I always make them leave from Moscow. So they're all Muscovite, the culture, and I colonize all of this very easily to colonize all of this area. But I didn't have Perm. Perm I actually struggled with. I got a little bit unlucky. I managed to get Perm by the 1630s. I got the rest of this with the exception of Perm, and I didn't have border over here with the Black Sea. So I did not reach the Black Sea yet. I was close to it, but not yet there. So I was a lot less aggressive than Habibi was in his particular playthrough by 1590. I did have a lot more economy and a lot more manpower in my last playthrough. I had actually less population as you would expect since I have less lands. Something that surprised me is the Sultanate of the Ottomans actually getting the Sultanate. In my game, they got like half of Anatolia. They became Greek culture because remember the last patch they applied makes it so they adopt the majority culture in their country. In their country at the start of the campaign is Greek. So the Ottomans in the current patch are always Greek. But I'm sure that's going to be changed. Don't worry about it. Pretty standard for Hungary to eat up Wallachia, Serbia. That happens in pretty much all of my games as well. Kingdom of Poland is huge. I don't think I remember Poland eating up Galicia. Usually that gets eaten up by Kiev. Kiev actually eats a lot. They get super strong. I like to ally the Principality of Kiev myself. And I sometimes struggle with Sweden because they eat a lot of Novgorod also if I don't eat Novgorod in time. That being said, Novgorod does have claims on Kola and all of these areas, so you can use those claims to make sure that Swedes don't get there before you do, if you know what you're doing. Now I'm going to do a classic Painterino here and show you guys what I did after 1590s. So in my game, by 1650, roughly 1650, I had about this much. So by 1650, I did get Crimea. I got most of the Kiev bits. I did backstab the Kiev a lot, actually. And I had around this much with all of the Siberian parts. It was basically this much by 1650. And I didn't expand actually for like 70 years. I was just trying to see how much control I can get. I got a ridiculous, I'm not gonna lie, I got a ridiculous amount of control. And then I started making towns and cities everywhere. As my population reached 50,000, the second it reached 50,000, I turned that particular location into a city, which made it so much better because cities means you can get more buildings and you can just make it a lot easier to assimilate pops when they come to that city and so on, convert them and so on. So it's just vital that you upgrade as much as possible to city rank as soon as you can. By 1836, I did have historical Russian borders. So I think I managed to get historical Russian borders, well, the highest extent of Russian borders by 1740 maybe, around that time. So I had all of the Baltics. I had basically all like this. These were my borders in Europe. And then all of Central Asia, all the way to the coastline of the Pacific. I had all of that. Basically everything was historical Russian borders by the middle of the 1700s. So that's easy to get. I could have gotten it earlier. I just didn't really, I wasn't very aggressive in my game. I was mostly trying to learn the game, learn the metas, learn how to most efficiently approach stuff, learn in the late game what happens that I need to be aware of and stuff. I have to say, the rest of Europe was pretty strong too. The French were super strong in my game. They got mostly all of France and like half of Iberia by the 1700s. This is basically my France by the 1700s, this size. And then Italy actually was still disunified. I think Tuscany was mostly in the north, had most of the north, and Two Sicilies was still most of the south. The Ottomans, they didn't have most of Greece. They actually had like a little piece here, and they had all of Anatolia and a little bit of Syria. This was the extent of the Ottomans by the end of the campaign. Georgia was massive. They had all of this. I think Georgia had a big chunk of the Persian parts too, and then the Timurids somehow were still alive in 1836. They had around this part. So Timurids were Central Asia in essence. They managed to keep and centralize whatever they conquered earlier in the campaign, which happens in most games. Sweden got all of Scandinavia, and the British Isles unified. They were actually pretty strong. The New World was like 80% owned by the British Empire. I don't know what the hell happened to Portugal and Castile, but the British just completely took all of North and Central America. Half of South America was British as well. Iceland, I think, was a foothold of Norway. And in the Middle East, the Mamluks did not collapse. I don't know why. I have not yet seen the Mamluks collapse. They were still there, pretty strong. North Africa was all Morocco. The entirety of North Africa was Morocco, and Portugal and Castile were just tiny little parts of the Iberian parts. This was all Hungary, and a breakaway state that used to be a revolt of the Eastern Roman Empire was called Byzantion. They owned all of Greece, whilst the HRE was a little bit Brandenburg, a little bit Saxony, massive Bohemia was most of the HRE, little tiny Austria, and a little bit of dots in the middle here, still up until 1836, with this part here being Volgast out of all nations. So yeah, that was basically my particular game. I hope you guys enjoyed this AAR. Let me know what you would like me to talk more about in future AARs. I'm currently doing a brand new Brandenburg campaign. The last one was not as fun as I expected it to. It was actually pretty bad because they have a lot of horrible events that just makes it unfun to play as. I'm doing a Spain, I'm doing a France, a Hungary, a Holland, and a Florence campaign. So these are the ones I'm doing right now. I'm trying to see how they all are. I'm trying to try out as many things as possible. I think I'm going to start today likely a Japan campaign. Let me know which one of these you'd like me to do as an AAR next. I'd appreciate you letting me know. Don't forget to also leave a like and subscribe and get the game for yourself with my code. It would really mean the world to me. Love you all, and I'll see you in the next one.